The testing chamber hummed with the kind of sterile efficiency that made my mandibles ache. I am Kreltix, Senior Examiner for the Galactic Academy's entrance trials, and in my 43 cycles of service, I have witnessed approximately 12,000 species attempt our sacred evaluations. Not once, not ever, had I encountered a situation quite like this. The human stood in the center of the observation sphere, and, honestly, she looked bored. Candidate designation? I clicked into the translation matrix. Mira Kosevich, she replied, rolling her shoulders like she was preparing for a leisurely swim rather than the most rigorous non-violent assessment in 7 sectors. Though I prefer just Mira, if that's all right with you folks. Folks, as if we were gathering for a casual meal instead of determining her entire future. My colleague, Tharn, a Vexillian, with entirely too many eyes for his own good, leaned toward me. His whisper carried across our private channel. Another human. Command is insisting we accept more of them after the incident with the Terran Diplomatic Corps. I recall, I muttered back. The incident. What a polite way to describe 3 humans accidentally dismantling a supposedly impenetrable defense grid while trying to fix what they called a minor technical hiccup. But I digress. The test parameters are simple, I announced, trying to inject authority into my voice. You will face 3 scenarios, each designed to evaluate problem-solving, ethical reasoning, and tactical creativity. All scenarios are strictly non-violent. Physical harm to any entity, real or simulated, results in immediate disqualification. Do you understand? Crystal clear, Mira said, then paused. Well, not crystal. More like transparently clear. But I activated the first scenario anyway. The chamber shifted, holographic projections materializing into a bustling marketplace on Trell Prime. The simulation was perfect, down to the merchants hawking bioluminescent fruits and the smell of oxidized copper from the nearby foundries. In the center of the scenario stood a Trell child, separated from its family unit, distress pheromones visible as purple mist in the enhanced display. Standard protocol dictated candidates would use communication, perhaps establish trust, through recognized universal gestures and systematically search the area. Time to completion averaged 17 minutes. Mira walked directly to the nearest fruit vendor and started talking. Not to the child, to the vendor. Hey there, friend. Lovely stand you've got. Those phosphor melons look absolutely divine. Tharn's confusion radiated through his external thermal signature. What is she doing? I have no idea, I admitted. The vendor, programmed with advanced reactive algorithms, responded with appropriate suspicion. You want to purchase? Maybe later. Listen, you see everything happening in this market, right? You're positioned perfectly. She gestured broadly, her movements casual but deliberate. I bet nothing gets past you. This is truth. The vendor's avatar puffed up slightly. Thought so. That kid over there? The little one who looks lost? Probably has worried parents somewhere. Now, if I were a parent in this market and I lost my kid, where would I go? Customer service? Central authority station? The vendor's programming adapted. The information nexus. 3 blocks. Eastern quadrant. Perfect. And if you spot the parents before I get back, maybe mention their kid is safe and headed that way. Mira scooped up the child, who immediately calmed at her confident demeanor and walked directly to the nexus. 4 minutes, 27 seconds. New record. Tharn made a noise like escaping hydraulics. She manipulated the environmental parameters. The scenario allows for interaction with all elements, I noted, though internally, I was recalculating everything I thought I understood about human cognition. Mira returned to the center position, set down the reunited child, and looked up at our observation pod. Next, second scenario, a diplomatic crisis. 6 species representatives, each with conflicting cultural requirements for a treaty signing ceremony. The catch? One ceremony space, overlapping taboos, and limited resources. Candidates typically spent 30 minutes mapping compatibility matrices. Mira spent 15 seconds looking at the representatives, then started laughing. Actually laughing. "Oh, this is good," she said, still chuckling. Okay, let me see if I've got this right. Ven over there needs minimal gravitational pressure because of the ceremonial molting traditions. Hawks requires precisely 12 witnesses arranged in sacred geometry. The Talix delegation cannot occupy the same vertical space as authority figures without causing religious offense. The Kelton ambassador needs constant hydration. The Frill representative requires absolute silence during the signing, and the Waru elder cannot be in the presence of the color blue. She listed everything correctly, while simultaneously moving around the space, like she was choreographing a dance. This isn't a diplomatic problem, it's a physics problem. And physics? Physics I can work with. What happened next made my respiratory spiracles clench. She started adjusting the gravitational fields. Not the simulation controls, the actual localized gravity within the testing parameters. Humans, it turned out, were absurdly good at intuitive gravitational manipulation once they understood the principles. Something about growing up on a planet with uncomfortably high base gravity made them surprisingly adept. Mira created zones, 6 distinct gravitational pockets, each calibrated differently. The Ven representative floated in a low G bubble near the ceiling, perfect for molting traditions. Below that, she positioned the Talix delegation in a separate pocket, technically not sharing vertical space with anyone, because they existed in their own gravitational frame of reference. Hawks needs 12 witnesses in sacred geometry, she muttered, anchoring observer platforms at mathematically precise angles around a central signing platform. The Kelton ambassador gets a hydration column running through their zone. Frill representative? That one's tricky. She created a gravitational dampening field that absorbed sound waves before they reached the Frill's position. Meanwhile, the Waru elder's space was bathed in every color except blue, the gravitational lensing bending light, specifically to filter that wavelength. And the signing platform goes here, in neutral space, where all gravitational fields intersect but don't overlap, she concluded, planting a pedestal at the mathematical center point. Everyone can participate according to their traditions, without compromising anyone else's requirements. Treaty signed, everyone goes home happy, and nobody has to pretend their deeply held cultural beliefs don't matter. 17 minutes. The previous record was 2 hours and 43 minutes. Tharn was vibrating now, a sign of extreme agitation in Vixilians. She weaponized gravity, in a non-violent assessment. Technically, she optimized spatial arrangements using available physical principles, I corrected, though my own thoughts were spiraling. No violence occurred. This is the human they send us? Tharn's eyes, all 17 of them, focused on me with accusatory intensity. After the defense grid incident? After the reactor recalibration? After the navigation array improvement that wasn't requested and terrified our engineers? She is performing exceptionally well, I said, with perhaps more defensiveness than the situation warranted. Mira was already back at the center position, waiting with that same expression of mild amusement that I was beginning to suspect was her default setting. So, what's behind door number 3? Please tell me. It involves something interesting. The first 2 were decent warm-ups. Warm-ups? She called Academy entrance scenarios warm-ups. I activated the final test with what I can only describe as vindictive anticipation. The chamber transformed into a labyrinth. Not a simple maze, but a multi-dimensional construct with shifting passages, temporal distortions, and cognitive traps designed by the finest sadists, the finest minds in psychological assessment. At the center? A theoretical artifact of immense cultural significance to a fictional species. The goal? Retrieve it without triggering any of the approximately 400 nested security measures. Most candidates attempted to map the labyrinth or identify patterns. The highest scorers usually found clever ways to bypass sections or negotiate with the automated guardian constructs. Mira looked at the entrance, looked up at our observation position, and smiled. That smile. I have seen predators display less unsettling expressions before striking prey. "Question," she called out. "Are there explicit rules about how I reach the center?" I consulted the parameters. No violence, no destruction of the labyrinth structure itself. The artifact must remain undamaged. Beyond that, methodology is unrestricted. Fantastic. She sat down, cross-legged, right at the entrance. And then she changed the gravity. Not locally, not in small adjustments. She inverted it for the entire labyrinth. The maze, designed for beings that experienced gravity as a downward force, became completely navigable as straight corridors when down became up. Security measures built around gravitational assumptions failed instantly. Temporal distortions calibrated for standard directional movement simply didn't activate because nothing was moving in the expected planes. Mira stood up, now standing on what had been the ceiling from the labyrinth's perspective, and walked in a perfectly straight line to the center. The artifact sat there, unguarded because every security layer had been rendered irrelevant by a simple change in fundamental orientation. She picked it up, reversed the gravity again with casual ease, and walked back to the starting position. 3 minutes? 12 seconds. "You know," she said conversationally, as if she hadn't just invalidated centuries of assessment design methodology, "that was actually kind of fun." The temporal distortions were a nice touch. Really would have complicated things if I'd tried to navigate traditionally. Whoever designed this clearly understands layered security theory. Tharn's silence screamed louder than any protest could have. "The test is concluded," I managed to say, my translation matrix adding a tremor I hadn't intended. "Your scores will be calculated and transmitted within standard processing periods." "Cool, thanks." Mira stretched, joints popping in that disturbing way human skeletal systems allowed. "Oh, quick question before I go. That gravity manipulation? You folks use it all the time, right? For ships, stations, all the standard stuff? So it's available as a tool generally?" "Yes," I confirmed, uncertain where she was heading. "But you don't usually think about using it creatively for problem solving? It's just infrastructure?" The question hung in the air like an unexploded munition. "That's accurate," Tharn finally responded, his voice hollow. Mira nodded thoughtfully. "Huh, interesting. Well, thanks for the opportunity. Let me know about those results when you get a chance." She left the chamber with a cheerful wave. Tharn and I sat in silence for approximately 7 minutes before either of us could formulate words. "She's going to be accepted," I finally said. "Obviously. This is going to cause problems. Catastrophically." We both knew it was true. The humans had a talent for looking at systems everyone else considered fundamental and immutable, then asking why they couldn't just be adjusted. They treated universal constants like polite suggestions and approached problems with a combination of creativity and terrifying disregard for conventional wisdom. And now, we were going to put them through advanced education. I pulled up Mira's file, scanning through her background data. Born on Earth, educated in what humans called mixed discipline programs, experience in something called extreme environmental engineering. A note from her application essay caught my attention. "I believe the greatest limitations exist not in our circumstances, but in our assumptions about what those circumstances allow. We should recommend additional oversight," Tharn suggested. "Perhaps specialized monitoring protocols." "Agreed," I said, though privately I suspected no amount of oversight would contain whatever chaos Mira and her fellow humans would generate. The communication panel chimed. Director Ven's signature appeared, which was unusual. Directors rarely contacted examiners directly about individual candidates. Examiners Kreltix and Tharn, preliminary analysis of candidate Kosovich's performance has flagged several items requiring immediate discussion. Report to Administrative Sector 7 immediately. Tharn looked at me with an expression I'd learned to interpret as deep concern. They watched in real time. Of course they did, I replied, feeling the weight of bureaucratic complications settling over my carapace like particularly dense atmosphere. It's a human candidate. After the previous incidents, every human assessment is monitored at the highest levels. We made our way through the Academy's gleaming corridors, past students from hundreds of species engaged in study, practice, and the general chaos of advanced education. Several nodded respectfully to us. We were, after all, gatekeepers. We determined who entered these halls and who returned home with rejection notices. I had never felt less certain about my role. Director Ven's office occupied a space designed for comfort across multiple species. Specifications. The atmosphere was calibrated to neutral preferences, the furniture adaptive, the lighting adjustable. Ven herself, a Corellian with distinguished silver patterning along her exoskeleton, regarded us with her characteristic calm intensity. "Sit," she commanded simply. We sat. The human candidate. Ven began without preamble, completed 3 assessment scenarios designed to require a minimum of 47 minutes total, with an average completion time across all species of 93 minutes. She finished in 24 minutes, 41 seconds. "Yes, Director," I confirmed. Furthermore, her methodologies bypassed approximately 78% of the intended challenge parameters through what I can only describe as aggressive recontextualization of fundamental physics. "Also accurate, Director." Ven leaned forward, her posture suggesting something between curiosity and concern. "Explain to me, Examiner Kreltix, how a non-violent assessment was completed using what amounts to weaponized gravity manipulation." "She didn't weaponize it, Director," I replied carefully. "She simply used available environmental controls in unconventional applications. No violence occurred. No entities were harmed. No structures were damaged beyond intended parameters. She inverted an entire labyrinth's gravitational orientation." "Yes, Director." "That wasn't violence? The labyrinth was holographic. The inversion was a navigation strategy." Ven made a sound. I'd learned, indicated Corellian frustration. "You realize that if we accept this human into the Academy, she will be exposed to advanced gravitational theory, multidimensional physics, and temporal mechanics?" The thought had occurred to me. It also terrified me. But I responded professionally. "She has demonstrated exceptional aptitude for practical application of existing principles." "That's what concerns me," Ven said quietly. "The humans don't just learn our sciences. They absorb them, then immediately start asking why we do things certain ways and whether alternative approaches might work better." Tharn, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "Director, with respect, isn't that the point of education? To encourage innovative thinking and challenge existing paradigms? In theory, yes. In practice?" Ven pulled up a display showing incident reports. "Humans have been part of the galactic community for 16 standard cycles. In that time, they have improved 17 critical systems, identified 43 major inefficiencies in our infrastructure, revolutionized 6 fields of study, and caused 92 separate incidents requiring diplomatic intervention because they fixed things that weren't broken, according to everyone else, but were definitely broken according to human standards." The list. I scrolled past. I recognized several incidents. The defense grid, the reactor recalibrations, the navigation array improvements, a particular incident involving a human named Jakob Peterson, who had redesigned an entire space station's life support system while supposedly performing routine maintenance. "They mean well," I offered weakly. "I know they do," Ven replied, and her tone carried genuine warmth now, mixed with exasperation. That's what makes this complicated. They're not malicious. They're helpful. Aggressively, terrifyingly, unstoppably helpful. She closed the display and looked at both of us directly. Here is my dilemma, examiners. Mira Kosovic scored in the 99th percentile across all assessment categories. Her ethical reasoning was impeccable. Her problem-solving approaches, while unconventional, were devastatingly effective. By every measurable standard, she is exactly the kind of candidate the Academy exists to nurture. But, Tharn prompted, but she completed a gravity manipulation exercise that should have been impossible for a first-cycle candidate, using techniques our advanced students don't learn until their third cycle. And she did it casually, like it was obvious. I understood the concern now. It wasn't about Mira's capabilities. It was about what happened when you gave someone with her instincts access to tools and knowledge she would immediately weaponize into solving problems nobody else realized existed. What would you have us do, Director? I asked. Ven was quiet for a long moment. Accept her, obviously. We can't reject a candidate of her caliber. But I want comprehensive monitoring. I want her assigned to instructors who can handle unconventional thinking. And I want regular reports on any incidents involving creative reinterpretation of fundamental physics. Understood, Director? Dismissed. And examiners? Good work today, even if it does complicate my job considerably. We left the office and made our way back to the examination sector in contemplative silence. Other candidates were finishing their assessments, standard performances, predictable methodologies, expected results. Everything was normal, which made what happened with Mira seem even more extraordinary. She's going to change things here, Tharn said as we reached our shared workspace. Yes, I agreed. Other students will watch her, learn from her, start questioning assumptions. Probably. The humans are going to make the Academy interesting, aren't they? I thought about that smile Mira had given before inverting the labyrinth, thought about the casual way she'd discussed physics like they were suggestions rather than laws, thought about 12,000 species worth of candidates I'd assessed, and how none of them had ever made me reconsider the fundamental nature of our evaluation methods. Interesting is one word for it, I finally replied. I'm not sure it's the right word, but it's definitely a word. My console chimed with the official results processing confirmation. Mira's scores were being calculated and verified. They would be spectacular, of course. And then she would arrive at the Graer Academy as a full student, along with, I noticed from the pending applications list, 7 other humans scheduled for assessment in the next cycle. Tharn saw me looking at the list. 8 humans. Yes, in one cycle. Apparently, Earth is very enthusiastic about galactic education opportunities. We're going to need larger incident report forms, Tharn observed. He wasn't wrong. I filed the day's observations, flagged Mira's assessment for special attention, and prepared myself for what would undoubtedly be an interesting conversation when she officially enrolled. Somewhere in the Academy's residential sectors, I imagined her settling into temporary housing, already planning, already thinking, already looking at systems everyone else accepted, and asking that most dangerous of human questions, why not? 3 months into the academic cycle, and Mira Kosovic had already become a legend. Not the good kind, either. More like the kind of legend that made instructors check their lesson plans twice and facilities managers develop nervous tics. I was reviewing incident reports in my office when Professor Trelnak burst through the door without announcing himself. Rude, even by human standards. She melted the observation deck, he announced, his vocal sac inflating to twice its normal size. I looked up slowly from my data tablet. Define melted. Structurally compromised through thermal manipulation. The entire viewing platform, during a basic thermodynamics lecture. Was anyone injured? No, but that's hardly the point. Actually, that was entirely the point. but I'd learned not to argue with Trelnak when he was agitated. His species released pheromones that smelled like burning plastic when stressed, and my office ventilation was already struggling. "Walk me through what happened," I said, activating a new incident form with the resignation of someone who'd been filling out far too many of these lately. Trelnak settled into the adaptive chair, which groaned under his bulk. Standard lecture on heat transfer principles. I was explaining the theoretical limits of thermal conduction when Kosovich raised her hand. Nothing good ever followed those words anymore. She asked why we treated heat as something that naturally dissipated rather than something that could be directionally focused. I explained that, while possible in controlled laboratory conditions, practical applications were limited by material constraints and energy requirements. "Let me guess," I interrupted. She disagreed? She demonstrated. Using the lecture hall's environmental controls and some kind of improvised resonance configuration, she created a directed thermal pathway that superheated a specific structural support beam while keeping everything else at standard temperature. The beam expanded by 0.03%, just enough to warp the mounting brackets on the observation deck. I made notes, though I was beginning to recognize the pattern. Structural damage? Minimal. Facilities had it repaired in 40 minutes. But Kreltix, she did it to prove a point during a lecture. She turned an entire classroom into a demonstration of advanced engineering principles we don't cover until fourth cycle. Did it work? Trelnak's sack deflated slightly. Of course it worked. That's the problem. Now half my students are asking why we don't incorporate directional thermal dynamics into standard ship design, and the other half are requesting permission to experiment with environmental control systems. Which you denied? Obviously. Can you imagine 50 students trying to recreate Kosovich's experiment? We'd have structural failures in every building on campus. He had a point. I flagged Mira's file for additional oversight and added a note to restrict her access to environmental controls during lectures. Then I remembered who I was dealing with and added another note that she'd probably find a workaround within a week. "I'll speak with her," I assured Trelnak. "Good. Please." Before she decides to demonstrate the practical applications of controlled fusion reactions or something equally terrifying. After he left, trailing the scent of burnt plastic, I pulled up the comprehensive monitoring reports Director Venn had requested. They made for fascinating reading, assuming your definition of fascinating included phrases like unauthorized gravity, well experimentation, and creative reinterpretation of safety protocols. But here's what the reports also showed. Mira's academic performance was flawless. Perfect scores across every subject. More importantly, her collaboration assessments were outstanding. She helped struggling classmates, explained concepts in novel ways that made them accessible, and had somehow become the unofficial tutor for students who couldn't grasp traditional teaching methods. The problem wasn't that she was disruptive. The problem was that she was effectively disruptive while being genuinely helpful and completely oblivious to the chaos she generated. My communication panel chimed. Tharn's signature appeared. "Conference room! Now! You need to see this." I found him in observation room 12, watching a recorded training session. On screen, Mira and 5 other students were participating in a zero-gravity rescue simulation. Standard exercise. Teams had to retrieve a disabled pod from a deteriorating orbit while managing limited fuel, time constraints, and communication difficulties. "Watch," Tharn said simply. The simulation started normally. Teams launched, began calculating intercept trajectories, coordinating movements, standard stuff. Then, Mira's team did something I'd never seen before. They stopped moving. Just hung there in simulated space, apparently doing nothing while their competitors burned fuel racing toward the objective. "Equipment malfunction?" I asked. "Keep watching." The other teams reached the disabled pod simultaneously, resulting in the predictable chaos of multiple groups trying to claim the same objective. Arguments erupted. Fuel was wasted on jockeying for position. Time ticked away. Meanwhile, Mira's team had slowly drifted into a position that seemed random until you looked at it from a gravitational mechanics perspective. They'd positioned themselves at a Lagrange point relative to the pod's decaying orbit and the planetary body it was falling toward. Then they waited. Orbital mechanics being what they are, the pod's trajectory brought it directly to them. No fuel expenditure required, no competition. They secured it, calculated the return vector, and won the exercise with 70% of their fuel remaining. She used patience as a weapon. I said, somewhat awed despite myself. She used physics as strategy. Tharn corrected. While everyone else treated it like a race, she treated it like an orbital mechanics problem. Her entire team just sat there while she calculated natural trajectories. The other students must have been furious. Watch the debrief. The recording switched to post-simulation. Analysis. The exercise coordinator, a Ven named Sarak, was reviewing each team's performance. When he reached Mira's team, his tone was carefully neutral. Explain your methodology. Mira shrugged. That casual human gesture that somehow conveyed both confidence and nonchalance. Everything in space is always moving, right? Orbits, rotations, gravitational influences. Fighting against that movement costs energy. So instead of fighting, we let the math work for us. We positioned ourselves where it would naturally arrive and waited. Sometimes the best action is strategic inaction. One of the students from a competing team, a Hawks named Velik, spoke up with obvious frustration. That's not how the exercise works. We're supposed to demonstrate quick response capabilities. The exercise parameters were to retrieve the pod efficiently, Mira replied calmly. Efficient means minimum resource expenditure for maximum result. We spent almost no fuel and completed the objective faster than any team using conventional approaches. Sarak had looked distinctly uncomfortable. Your interpretation of the parameters was technically correct, but unconventional. Mira finished for him. Yeah, I'm getting that feedback a lot lately. Look, I'm not trying to break your exercises. I'm just solving the problems using available information. If there are specific methodologies you want us to practice, maybe state those explicitly in the parameters? The recording ended. Tharn looked at me with an expression I'd learned to interpret as somewhere between admiration and existential dread. She's teaching other students to think like her. Is that bad? I don't know. Ask me in 5 cycles when we have a graduating class that treats fundamental physics like optional suggestions. He had a point. The Academy's entire educational philosophy was built on established methodologies, proven techniques, centuries of refined knowledge. What happened when you introduced students who questioned everything and found alternative approaches to problems everyone else considered solved? My console pinged with an urgent message. Director Ven wanted to see me immediately. Again. This was becoming a pattern. I found Ven in her office, along with 3 other administrators I recognized as department heads. Their expressions ranged from concerned to bewildered to something approaching impressed. Examiner Kreltix. Ven began without preamble. We have a situation. Kosovich? I guessed. Kosovich, she confirmed. Along with 7 other human students who enrolled this cycle. They've started something they're calling a problem-solving workshop. That sounded innocent enough. Is that not encouraged? Collaborative learning groups are standard practice. Tell him what they're solving. One of the department heads, a Kelton named Riff, interjected. Ven pulled up a display. They've taken it upon themselves to identify and solve what they consider inefficiencies in academy operations. In the past month, they've redesigned the cafeteria queuing system to reduce wait times by 37%, reorganized the library's data architecture to improve search efficiency, and proposed 17 modifications to campus infrastructure that our engineering department admits would be improvements, but require approval from facilities management across 6 different bureaucratic levels. They're trying to help, I said, though even I could hear how weak that sounded. They're trying to fix everything, Riff countered. And the problem is their fixes work. The cafeteria redesign was so effective that students from other institutions are requesting tours to study it. The library modification has been submitted for a Galactic Efficiency Award. They're making us look incompetent by comparison. You're upset because human students are improving academy operations? I asked, confused. We're concerned because they're doing it without authorization, without oversight, and without seeming to understand that some systems exist the way they do for reasons beyond pure efficiency, Ven explained patiently. Not everything is a problem to be solved. Sometimes processes are intentionally slower to allow for review, verification, or social interaction. Have you explained this to them? Mira's response was to ask why we didn't document those intentional inefficiencies so people would understand they were features rather than bugs. Ven's tone suggested this had not been the response she'd hoped for. She then offered to help create a comprehensive database of intentional design choices to prevent future confusion. I could see the problem now. The humans weren't being malicious or even particularly disruptive. They were being helpful in a way that highlighted how many things could be improved if someone just questioned whether they needed to be done the traditional way. What would you like me to do? Talk to them, Ben said. All of them. Explain that while innovation is valued, there are appropriate channels for proposing changes. Help them understand the difference between academic exercises and operational modifications that affect thousands of individuals. And if they don't understand, then we adapt, she said simply. Because rejecting innovative thinking from students who are academically excellent and genuinely trying to contribute would make us the kind of institution that stagnates rather than grows. But we need them to work within some kind of framework. I scheduled a meeting with all 8 human students for the following day. They arrived punctually, which I'd learned was unusual for most species, but apparently standard for humans who'd been raised with cultural emphasis on time management. Mira sat in the front, naturally, flanked by her fellow humans, Jakob Peterson, the one who'd redesigned that space station's life support. Yuki Tanaka, who'd somehow improved the Academy's power distribution efficiency by 12% during what she claimed was routine maintenance. Marcus Okoye, who'd been flagged for solving a 4th-cycle astrophysics problem during his first week, using what he called basic calculus and common sense. The list went on. 8 humans, each brilliant, each helpful, each absolutely oblivious to the administrative chaos they were generating. Thank you for coming, I began, trying to strike a balance between authority and approachability. I want to discuss your extracurricular problem-solving activities. Mira raised her hand. I was learning to dread that gesture. Are we in trouble? She asked directly. Because if we violated regulations, we need to know specifically which ones so we can avoid doing so in the future. You're not in trouble, I assured them. Your intentions are clearly positive, and your results have been impressive. However, there are concerns about implementing operational changes without proper authorization and oversight. Jakob leaned forward. With respect, examiner, we followed the procedures outlined in the student handbook for proposing facility improvements. Our cafeteria redesign was approved by the food services coordinator. The library modification was implemented by the head librarian. We didn't change anything without permission. The issue isn't permission, I tried to explain. It's scope. Your first-cycle students implementing changes that typically require approval from multiple administrative levels. Then, maybe the approval process is inefficient? Yuki suggested helpfully. We could streamline that too. Several other humans nodded in agreement. I felt a headache forming, despite my species' lack of pain receptors in that region. Not everything needs to be streamlined, I said carefully. Sometimes processes exist to ensure proper review, to allow multiple perspectives, to prevent unintended consequences. Okay, that makes sense, Mira acknowledged. So, what you're saying is, we need to do better impact analysis before proposing changes? Factor in systemic effects beyond immediate efficiency gains? Exactly. Yes, that's fair. We can do that. She looked at her fellow humans, who were all nodding. We'll create a comprehensive evaluation framework that accounts for social impact, administrative requirements, and long-term sustainability before proposing future modifications. That sounded reasonable. Too reasonable. I waited for the other shoe to drop. Can we submit the framework to you for review? Marcus asked. To make sure we're incorporating the right considerations? Of course, I agreed, relieved that they seemed to understand. They left peacefully, discussing evaluation metrics and impact assessment methodologies. I felt cautiously optimistic that we'd reached an understanding. 3 days later, they submitted their comprehensive evaluation framework. It was 47 pages long, incorporated best practices from 16 different fields, and was so thorough that Director Venn immediately forwarded it to the Administrative Efficiency Committee as a potential standard for the entire Academy. They turned my request for restraint into a tool for more effective improvement proposals, Venn said, when she called me to her office yet again. But this time, she was smiling. These humans are going to completely transform how this institution operates, aren't they? Probably, I admitted. Good. We've been doing things the same way for too long. Maybe we needed someone to come along and ask why. She pulled up Mira's latest academic report. Her thesis advisor tells me she's proposed a research project on practical applications of gravitational manipulation for emergency response scenarios. Should I be concerned? Probably, but also excited. Because if even half of what she's proposing is achievable, we're looking at potentially revolutionary advances in disaster relief capabilities. Over the following weeks, I watched the human students integrate more fully into academy life. They still questioned everything, still found innovative solutions to problems, still caused minor incidents that required incident reports. But they also elevated the academic discourse, challenged their classmates to think differently, and generated a kind of intellectual energy that was infectious. Mira's gravity research project attracted collaborators from 6 different species. Her systematic approach to testing hypotheses, combined with her willingness to fail spectacularly and learn from those failures, created an environment where innovation felt safe. I found myself in the Academy's central garden one evening, reviewing reports when Mira appeared on the path. She was carrying data tablets and looked exhausted but satisfied. "Examiner Krell Tix," she greeted me. "Mind if I sit? Please." She settled onto the adaptive bench with a grateful sigh. Long day. We had a breakthrough in the gravity research. Turns out, you can create stable gravitational corridors for rapid personnel transport in emergency situations. Still needs refinement, but the basic principles work. Congratulations. Thanks. Hey, can I ask you something? I braced myself. Of course. That entrance exam, the one with the labyrinth. Did you design it expecting someone to invert the gravity? Absolutely not, she laughed. I figured. The look on your face when I did it was pretty memorable. But here's my question. If nobody had ever thought to try that approach before, how many other solutions are we missing because we're locked into conventional thinking? It was a fair question, an important question, and exactly the kind of question that made the humans simultaneously valuable and terrifying as students. I don't know, I admitted, but I suspect you and your cohort are going to help us find out. That's the plan. She stood, gathering her tablets. Oh, one more thing. We're organizing a symposium on unconventional problem-solving approaches. Faculty and students, cross-species collaboration, open forum for sharing weird ideas. You should come. I'll consider it. Cool. See you around, examiner. I watched her walk away, already talking animatedly into her communication device about gravitational corridor refinements. Behind me, the Academy's towers rose against the evening sky, ancient and proud, and filled with centuries of accumulated knowledge. And now, filled with humans who looked at all that accumulated knowledge and asked, "But what if we tried this instead?" Director Venn had been right. They were transforming the institution, not through rebellion or rejection of established wisdom, but through persistent, helpful, absolutely relentless questioning of assumptions everyone else had stopped examining. My console chimed with another incident report. Apparently, Jakob had improved the reclamation system's efficiency by 31%, using what he described as basic resource optimization. I opened a new file and began documenting, because that's what you did when you were responsible for monitoring the humans. You documented, you adapted, and you prepared yourself for whatever innovative chaos they'd generate next. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I realized I was looking forward to it. The humans had arrived at the Galactic Academy, and nothing would ever be quite the same again.